consensus is ideal but not necessary. Make sure you love what you're doing because it might work.
First off, Bill, tell me about yourself. Just a little bit about your background. What moves you to build MoveLoot?
Yeah. So it is an exhilarating story. So I grew up in North Carolina, where really in high school, that's where the environmental bug bit me. And so college, went to UNC, studied environmental science, chemistry, and thought I was going into renewables and the energy space. So ended up working at the Boston Consulting Group in energy and utilities. Turns out I did mostly oil and gas work, which is a fun side of energy, but not exactly why I got into the business. And then moved out to San Francisco, where you can actually make money working in the environment, which is an exciting philosophy. And was working at a clean tech venture firm called Green Start. And it was really that move from Dallas to San Francisco that that prompted the idea of MoveLoot, where maybe it's being in San Francisco, it's being in this environment, or being surrounded by awesome startups at the venture firm, where you see a problem and you're like, how can I solve this, rather than how can I complain about it? And so being around a lot of exciting people talking about really the marketplace concept, which was not top of mind for me at all when I was in North Carolina or Texas, but out in San Francisco, marketplaces, secondhand, really sharing resources and making the most of what we already have became an exciting kind of pivot for my environmental purpose, away from renewables and the energy landscape towards it's a different variation on using energy wisely, but it's using what we've already taken the time to build to repurpose it for a second, third, fourth life.
No, I think that's completely fascinating. I think just kind of like one of that open Kimono project, just coming from one of the topics that you spent some time on already, and I wanted to drill down on this, is there's such an important value that I don't think we ascribe to being around other entrepreneurs that push us to be better at our jobs, right, as CEOs. So being around another CEO, if you're in the right frame of mind, meaning, like, let's be honest, I mean, everything kind of sucks as a CEO. Everything is hard. Everything is tough. You don't get to complain no matter what. It's still your responsibility to deliver. How big of an impact was that for you?
For which part? Being surrounded by other CEOs?
Yeah, the Y Combinator program, and just in general, like, to push you forward.
Yeah. So I started MoveLoot with 3 other close friends, and so it's kind of the dual perspective of being surrounded by other people in the startup space, but also being surrounded by peers and building something together. I think it's both amazing and incredibly hard to build something with friends, beyond just building something, period. And it's such a roller coaster. So they're the ups and they're the downs. And as the business grows, the magnitude away from the mean only becomes greater. So the ups are higher and the lows are lower, and the problems are way harder to solve. So I think it's interesting to have that perspective along the way, being in cahoots with 3 friends who have been there since the beginning, but layering on an amazing team and being able to fill the gaps that we obviously have with talent and an awesome team that can balance us well. Foiling with the early days when it was just the 4 of us trying to think through what we were doing, and we had no idea the kind of resource that Y Combinator would be. I mean, you hear about it when you're in Silicon Valley, people know what Y Combinator is. None of us had lived here before. We were all, well, Jenny is from San Francisco, but we were all relatively new transplants and new to the tech scene. So we heard that it would be a good idea for us. Someone recommended it to us. And then once we got in, and then especially once we got there, we actually realized how valuable it was, kind of as really a kick in the ass to try to push harder and realize what success looked like, rather than us kind of tinkering with a toy. It propelled us to see what we were capable of doing. And I think it's a huge springboard for us.
So, I mean, even to kind of drill down, so I think one of the most important things, you know, as a young or new CEO is like getting the right kind of mentors around you, right, and drawing them in. I mean, even in Y Combinator, there's got to be competition for the mentorship program. How did you go after and get the right kind of mentors to help you and your co-founders kind of push things forward? How do you, you know, if you got any like really big, crazy success stories about pulling in a great mentor, what are some things? Because it's like recruiting an
The question of how to woo a mentor. So I think I've only created one startup, and that is MoveLoot, and I love helping people with the acknowledgement that I've only done this once. So my perspective is a single point of reference. You should get as many as possible, and make sure that you're calibrating your next steps using my insight, but also using several other people that have done this in a different way. And I think that's the interesting, that's my approach with mentorship, is really learning that it is one perspective from one person, and it's important to create a portfolio of perspectives on any given issue. And then if you are running the company, you know the company better than anyone else in the world. And that is something that I think especially first-time entrepreneurs need to really absorb and recognize, and find that both humbling and an opportunity, because it's a huge responsibility to take a lot of inputs and a lot of advice and turn that into the right path forward. But no one can do it but you. And so it's making sure you're getting the right people to give you the right advice on the right topics, but then you have to be the person that turns that into the actual tactical initiatives moving forward based on what you know about the industry and what you know about what you're building and what you know everyone else said. So that's more my approach to managing advice. I found that in San Francisco and across the country, like, people love giving advice. It's an opportunity for people to ideally save others the pain that they went through, or get a chance to tackle a really interesting problem. So I think it's almost like, how do you frame it as an opportunity for the mentor rather than a needy ask?
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense to me, and I think you hit on like one of the things that we look at here at World Law, right? It's all about, like, we say there's really no wrong choice, right? You have as a CEO, right? Your choices are kind of all back behind, you know, making decisions around execution risk, and then kind of moving forward there. But even then, it's really tough to kind of point out and understand what your execution risk is based on the advice that you get from multiple people. And you weight some people's advice higher than others, but then you go back and say, even though I rate this person's advice higher, this guy, like, you know, or this girl, like, her advice is like so much better. And so a little bit of that, like, how do you guys, like, you got a 4-man team, how do you take advice and turn it into executable actions from that? I know it's a tough question, but I just love to see how you think about it.
How do we work?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Our founding team is very well balanced and very different in so many respects, and I did not really appreciate that until pretty far down the road. It's 2 men, 2 women, it's 2 introverts, it's 2 extroverts. We foil each other on several different dimensions, and that's both difficult for making sure everyone is happy with every decision. It's even more difficult for making sure that everyone is optimized to perform at their peak ability, given the process for managing 4 very different individuals. So for example, if we're trying to have a brainstorm session, the 2 extroverts are going to be babbling back and forth and kind of pinging off of one another, and then the 2 introverts will be internalizing that and thinking about what they want to say, but the 2 extroverts might never give them room. And we have to then make sure that there's proper calibration with prep work, in the meeting conversation, reflection after the meeting, and making sure that the different sets of ideas, and more importantly, the different ways that people present those ideas and reflect upon what has been discussed or decided, that all of that's taken into account to arrive at the best path forward. That being said, consensus is ideal but not necessary, and so then there's a pretty clear process for needing to sell something. It's just like selling your idea to investors, selling your product to a BD relationship. If you can't pitch the other founders that this is the right path forward, even though there might have been disagreement or dissent, then it's probably not the right path forward. But recognizing everyone's going to come together to make a decision in a different way, and trying to make sure that your team is set up for success so that everyone can provide their input and get on board for what makes sense with their personalities.
And so, to the personality question, right? And I ask this question to all the CEOs that come on the program. If you could like add in one skill set, one ability or quality about yourself, what would you add to your own like personality tool belt, and how would you leverage it better? What's the one thing like? And if I had this, I would be a better CEO.
Yeah. So it's an interesting question. I think for me, I know it's a tough thing to say because I'm not sure it actually make me a better CEO. I think one of my greater traits is the ability to think creatively, try to systematically attack a problem, trying to think outside the box, given what we have, resource constraints, trying to think through what we can do, what is the future, and might not look anything like where we are right now, but a month, 2 months from now, this is where I want us to be. Trying to operationalize that is especially in the moment, like trying to think through this would be such a great development for our product. Our customers would love this. Our infrastructure systems would be so behooved if we took this leap. Thinking about the stepwise procedure from getting from point A to point Z, there's many stops in between. That's something that I wish, and this is where I don't know if that would help us get to point Z if I was better at stopping to think through B, C, D. But I think it's incredibly important to have those two assets at the table to make sure that you don't go off the tracks into some crazy direction and then immediately try to get back on it, try to go to it on a different track. And that's definitely the feedback I get, is that it's a lot of forward thinking, less and less kind of stopping and smelling the roses and making sure that we that we think about where we are.
I totally agree. It's so hard when you're in the day-to-day. And by the way, thank you so much for like actually being vulnerable and saying, you know, these are things that I should know. But I think we're taught as CEOs a lot of times that we have to remain looking infallible. Like we can't make mistakes to our team, to investors, and a lot of this is just offer transparency, saying you can be transparent. You can explain the issues as long as you're relating. Hey, you know what? I'm gonna make a mistake. I'm smart to figure out where my weakness, turn it into a strength. A lot of times, our biggest weaknesses as CEOs is the strength of what like makes our company move forward. Either it's we're determined or a lot of things.
Yeah, and I think to comment on what you said, I think it is incredibly important to me that we demonstrate failure routinely, and that we, as a company, make sure that everyone at the company feels okay making mistakes, but they have to be smart mistakes. They have to be calculated. You have to understand the risk, and it's always a balance of speed and certainty, and it's a fine line to walk. And the more important thing is learning from failure, just as you learn from success. And I think what I personally don't do a good job of is celebrating success. It's kind of, success is table stakes. That's, if it works, that was assumed. We're doing all of this to get to something that works. So great, we made 6, 7 mistakes along the way. We got to the solution that works. We're there now, let's move on. And so it's recognizing as you scale, getting there, getting to that point took a lot of work and blood, sweat, and tears from a lot of people, especially as the team grows, there are different stakeholders, realizing that maybe it took 6, 7 iterations to get to the final path forward for that particular initiative. That might have been 5, 6, 7 people whose ideas didn't work. And how do you get everyone on the same page so that that end result is clearly an amalgamation of past failures and ideas from a lot of different inputs, and take time to celebrate that, both the successes and failures of the work that went into getting to where you are today.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, I want to get a little bit into, MoveLoot, what it does, talk a little bit about your company. I know you're not doing this just for, just for me. So talk about when you started and what drove what drove you to this product. I know we talked a little offline, but I want you to tell the audience what moved you to move.
Yeah. What moved to MoveLoot? So essentially MoveLoot is a product of a really painful moving process. So moving from Dallas to San Francisco, I sold everything in 1 week. I bought it all over again the next week and lost $3,000 in the process. Moving to San Francisco from Dallas, I was already losing a lot of money by just being here. And being the environmentalist, it's thinking through, I'm both very value prone and I'm very environmentally conscious. So it's the balance of those two things, where when I moved to San Francisco, I wanted to use Craigslist. I didn't have a car, I didn't have time, and I had so moving to IKEA, I spent money almost replicating the room I had in Dallas, and knew that at some point I would have to throw it away, and that was tough for me to justify both my wallet and my conscience. I think IKEA has done amazing things for the furniture industry. I think it's a really fascinating concept, but it did not at all meet the need that I had. And so for me to think through what the fragmentation in the furniture market, especially the secondary furniture market, was a really challenging problem to solve. When you balance that with everything you hear about fast scaling, burn, all of the things that would prevent you from actually building the right kind of system for solving this problem. So that led us to really take the hard approach of having the logistics in-house. So we have our own trucks, we have our own drivers, we do the warehousing, we clean it up, we photograph it, we store it, and then we pick it up and deliver it. It's really thinking at every step along the way, how do we be as valuable, useful, and efficient in our processes and the customer experience. And so that has morphed over time, and it's grown into something that we didn't expect. It worked, and now it's figuring out how to bring that to more people and make sure that we continue fulfilling the level of customer service that we sought to provide at the very beginning. Because moving and transacting 10 couches is very different than 1,000 and very different than 10,000 couches. So it's now definitely the scaling challenges of this need is out there. People want to find a better way to buy and sell furniture, and how do we do that efficiently for all customers, just like we did our first 10.
So take me back to that time when somebody put the first money into the account and how the team reacted the first time somebody paid. Was it, were you guys just like, oh, somebody paid, that's great, let's keep going? Or was it like, woo? Because I remember at Scout, it was $5.99. I fought for a week to get the developers to turn on billing because they didn't think anybody would buy something. I think we probably spent $100 in alcohol that night, maybe like $10 that day. Because we were just like, take me back there. What was that like?
Yeah. Well, so when we, the genesis of even a bank account, we did, we first did an Indiegogo campaign where we were concerned that it would really blow up, it'd go viral, that, oh no, what if everyone wants this? Turns out it was just begging friends and family for small donations. But it gave us enough to rent a storage unit, rent a Penske truck, and start doing the moves ourselves. So Ryan, our CTO, was coding the marketplace while Jenny Shruti and I were driving around town in a U-Haul trying to pick up couches, trying to beg people for their furniture. And then we would bring it back to the storage unit. We would photograph it. We used to get comments that it looked like our furniture was in a dungeon. So we've thankfully improved that part of the business. And then that was, none of us were getting paid. It was all like, we made money on every single sale, and that was, that's when we knew that we had a business, when people would give us the inventory for free because they wanted it gone. Like, it's such a pain point when you're trying to move or get rid of furniture, and there's no option besides the curb, and the vast majority of that goes to the landfill anyway. So because we had no cash in the bank, we could go pick up furniture for free and then sell it and make a profit right off the bat. And then the storage unit fees and the renting the truck ourselves, we realized that wouldn't really scale to a real business. And so that's when we applied to Y Combinator, which, to be honest, we did not know what it was going to provide for us. So complete transparency, we were surprised that $100,000 was part of getting into Y Combinator. So that's really when we were excited, because we knew that gave us several more months and the chance to actually hire other people to do moving with us. We still did a lot of the moves ourselves, but it felt good when we could actually start paying people.
So just a couple more questions, because it's so great of an interview. I appreciate your transparency. The biggest mistake that you and the team have made so far that you guys can kind of talk about?
Yeah, I'd say one of the biggest mistakes is trying to, off the bat, do all the furniture ourselves. We were definitely a hazard on the road, driving. So it's like, do things that don't scale, absolutely, but be safe while you're doing it. Most people don't think of it as a tech company as physical risk, but it was very, very laborious. Now, thankfully, we have training and processes in place so that our employees are much better equipped to do this than we were back then. There's also, if you think about what you're trying to bite off and chew with a company like this, we just had no perspective with how logistically intense this would be as we scaled. And so for example, we were managing inventory locations on Google Docs for way too long. That's because we didn't have a website, and like way before we had an Android app, we developed an internal QR code scanning process. We have truck routing, we have inventory management. It's now built in-house, and that's where 80% of our tech time goes, is the actual internal process and ops side of the business, to make sure that fulfillment is seamless. And yeah, I think that's not necessarily a mistake. You can't know what you don't know. But to your point of mentorship and advisory, definitely we should have gotten some pointers from other folks that had built logistics heavy businesses on how on the right kind of perspective to have going into this.
But ERP is like one of the hardest things that you got to sort out, right? And it seems like you guys are working great at that. I love this. One last question. Younger you, a few years ago, when you guys really started to think about this business, if you could go back in time, like sit yourself down, talk CEO and CEO, what would you tell yourself in order to prepare yourself for what you did? Like, this is that go back.
Yeah, I think I'd say that the three main points would be, one, make sure you love what you're doing because it might work. And so you might be there for a long time and you better be excited about that. Two, make sure you're doing it with the right people. Make sure that you're going to stick by each other's side, that you agree, that you disagree. And it's similar to a marriage. How well do you fight? And I think that is a huge thing, especially for young founders who don't have that kind of corporate business, or it could be other types of life experiences that help with the understanding of interpersonal dynamics. I mean, that is so fundamental to a startup, especially a high growth startup where you can't really deal with those kind of interpersonal issues along the way. I mean, you'll have to, but recognize that you should try to get the risk for error there as low as possible at the beginning. The third would be choose the right path for you. Especially in San Francisco, there's that kind of exciting allure for a venture-backed startup, and recognize what that means for your company, your business, your team, what the next 5 to 10 years would look like for you. It's very different than being your own boss, owning a small business that could eventually be a very large business depending on your growth and ambitions, but there are different ways to get there. And there's the venture-backed route, there's the debt-backed route, there's just the slow but steady profitable growth route. So I'd say take that into account to really make sure that you're building the business that you want to be building.